In this episode, I talk about when it's appropriate to prioritize improving how your horse moves. Doing it too soon or too late both have consequences. The most important thing is that you learn how to do it. So here we go, episode 216, When to Focus on Biomechanics. Hi, I'm Karen Rohlf, and welcome to Horse Training in Harmony. This podcast is about you making progress with your horse in a way that you both can love. It's about learning how to move and be in harmony. Because yes, you really can develop a horse to be both athletic and happy. When we show up as our best selves for our horses will show up for us. So, let's get started. I'm doing the episode on this subject today for a couple reasons. One is it's a really important and I think interesting subject, so yay. But also because I'm recording this now the end of January, and every March and every September we open up our Finding the Sweet Spot of Healthy Biomechanics program. And every time we do, we get a bunch of people going, I don't know if I'm ready. Is this the year? I'm not sure. So I wanted to put this episode out there to help everybody start thinking about it, because even if you're not totally feeling ready, there's time to get ready. And what we've found is most people underestimate how ready they are for it. So I think it's really important to kind of zoom out and look at the process of improving how your horse moves. Look at it in relationship to the whole big picture and understand what kind of foundation you need and why and how these things can all fit together. So if you have any if you're listening to this and it's approaching March or approaching September, you definitely want to think about it, and please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us or find us on social media. And just reach out. Email's always the best. info@dressagenaturally.net or Karen@dressagenaturally.net. And just start to talk with us. We can do a free private consult where we can listen to what's going on with you and your horse and see, exactly what's going on and what resource would be best for you. We definitely don't want you to be in a resource that's not appropriate for you. But this Sweet Spot course is so special. And it's highly supported. So weekly calls every week, live calls every week to answer questions. Plus we have a number of the Dressage Naturally coaches and instructors in there. Plus you can do private coaching. Plus it's an amazing community. So this is so much more than just an online course. It's really worth thinking about, and don't miss the opportunity for this amazing experience just because you're not sure if you're ready or not. Okay, well, let's get into it. So when I think about the question, which I often get asked, is like, when's the right time for me to focus on the biomechanics of my horse? That's a really important question. And getting the mental, emotional, and physical dynamic right throughout our horse's life or our time with a horse can be really challenging. So the more you understand about how all these pieces fit together, the better. And I've seen that, like, for every, young dressage horse that's being pushed into collection way too soon, there are even more horses with riders who feel unconfident or feel unable or feel unready to ask their horses to improve their biomechanics and how they move. So every horse and rider pair is different, but I'm hoping that this podcast will give some helpful guidelines to help everyone make better decisions around knowing when it's appropriate to focus on improving your horse's way of moving. So the Happy Athlete Training Scale is sort of the default framework that you can always look towards. And that's what I'm going to base, this discussion on. So the Happy Athlete Training Scale shows the basic priorities, and you can find a picture of this on my website, dressagenaturally.net. and just go to the top, look for the About thing at the top menu, and you'll see the drop down, and one of the choices there is the Happy Athlete Training Scale. But in a nutshell, it's where we prioritize at the base of the scale is happiness. Then the next priority is harmony. Then the next priority is communication. Then the next priority is biomechanics. And then the next priority is sport-specific training. So this is where, as the first priority, that your horse is happy and healthy and calm and content and comfortable. And the same goes for you. If you have two happy individuals, it'll be easier to harmonize together. That's where self-care starts. You're trusting each other. Your horse is attentive. You're attuned to each other. You're emotionally connected. And if you're in harmony in that way, it'll be easier to communicate. And so communication's the third priority. This is about responsiveness and eagerness and understanding and willingness and being mentally connected. And if you're able to be two happy individuals in harmony communicating, now we can talk about things like energy and balance and suppleness and rhythm and alignment and being physically connected with biomechanics. And then the pinnacle is the fifth priority, which is the sport-specific skills, being agile and athletic and strong and coordinated and powerful. So that's the Happy Athlete Training Scale. In a nutshell, it shows the basic priorities. So it tells us that biomechanics is not important until you and your horse are happy, trusting of each other, and can communicate well. And this makes sense, especially if you agree that it doesn't matter how cadenced your horse's canter is if he's afraid, out of control, and trying to run you out of the arena. Now, following these priorities doesn't mean that your horse's way of moving won't improve while you're in those foundational stages. In fact, following the scale and spending enough time in the basics, enough time making sure your horse is happy and comfortable, and taking the time to make sure that you develop trust and attunement with each other and harmony. And taking the time to make sure that the communication, the quality of the communication is really high, doing very simple things. Taking the time to do that can actually be the fastest and easiest way to improve how your horse moves. And that's one of the reasons, is because things like fear and confusion and feelings of helplessness or boredom actively work against the posture of healthy biomechanics. So a happy, healthy, calm horse who is mentally and emotionally connected with you will not have the postural problems that are associated with things like fear and tension and confusion, or the constant use of strong aids for control. So it just makes sense, I hope, that if you have a horse who's fearful and tense and frantic and not trusting, think of the tightness in the back, the rigidity in the body, the high-headedness, all of the readiness to explode or get out of there. That is working against what you're going to want for healthy movement. And so that means now you're just going to have to apply stronger and stronger aids. And especially if you're using your reins for control, reins can only shorten things. And contraction through the body is so detrimental to the way of moving that we're looking for. And similarly, things like confusion and boredom and lack of interesting communication that's where the horse can figure out what you're meaning. So sometimes lack of clarity can cause horses to kind of glaze over and go into sort of a shutdown mode, or they just don't put any effort in. And so even that kind of sort of, maybe not explosive, but sort of braced, locked up, low energy, that kind of a dynamic also works against the mechanics that we're looking for. So the first priority is always having that horse who's the happy camper, or comfortable transportation, as my original dressage trainer used to say. It's we just want to have a horse that we can go get groom, get on, ride around, and everything's fine. Like, it's just fine. It just works, and we're all kind of good. So like, no red flags. And it doesn't have to be fancier than that. Like, that's a nice goal to have anyway. Those kind of horses are sort of like the clean slates that become easier to then influence. However, I think students who wait too long before asking their horses to move in a more, athletic way and to move in a more balanced way might actually risk creating what I call like inactive, unhealthy biomechanics. And that's where, the horses just kind of plop along. So maybe there's nothing going wrong, and they're sort of happy campers and comfortable transportation, but horses are built on the forehand. And then when we sit on them, it just exacerbates it unless we do something. I mean, some horses can deal with this better, but many horses, they're carrying the burden of our weight, and it puts even more weight on the forehand. So now, even though we think we're not doing anything, and maybe we're not risking, doing it wrong, sometimes by not doing anything, you're causing different kind of stresses on the horse's body, but it can be just as physically damaging to the horse over time, even if mentally and emotionally they're in good shape. So I don't mean this to sound like gloom and doom, like there's a million ways for us to get it wrong. But in reality, there's a million ways for us to get it wrong. But luckily, there's also lots of ways that we can do it right. And by right, I mean that we're helping the horse carry us in a healthy way, but that feels good to him. Now, if you're already experienced and educated in doing dressage past the most basic levels, and if you're experienced and educated in riding horses in upper levels of collection, it can actually take a lot of self-control to not over-manipulate the body, and to not over-manipulate the body before happiness, harmony, and communication are in place. This is especially true. It's true in a couple cases. It's true if you have like the super talented horses where they don't even know what they're doing, but their body is just built in a way that like they look awesome, and it looks like they're doing, moving in a good way. But those super talented horses can often look beautiful and, a perfect picture of biomechanics, even if they're out of control. Which is like, in a way, it's like, oh, good, they can be out of control and they'll still, get high marks. But the problem is that they can get high marks while being, not in good communication and not emotionally stable, right? And not happy campers. And I actually think that is one of the big problems in the dressage community right now with the horses that are being bred, because they're being bred to have extravagant movement that's uphill and all these things, even if they're ridden pretty poorly. So that's just my 2 cents on that. The other problem with humans sort of tolerating this, like, ooh, looks pretty, even if it's out of control, is I think we have unconscious, or maybe sometimes consciously, our predatory human instincts kind of love the sight of a scared prey animal. I mean, not you, not me, but you guys have probably seen times, I was going to say, back in the day, but I think this still happens now. I'm just not necessarily seeing it. But when somebody wants to show off their horse, sometimes this would happen with stallions at breed shows, or in a demonstration or performance where they wanted to turn the horse loose in the arena and then show off how it moves. They put the horse in the arena, and then they put a plastic bag on the end of a stick, and they just shake the plastic bag to basically freak the horse out. So he moves, I'm going to make air quotes, pretty. So, or if you want to get like the good photo, often the photos are like, wow, that looks amazing, is actually a freaked out horse. And again, our, consciously or subconsciously, our predatory human selves kind of dig what that looks like. But once you know the difference between an exuberant, playful horse and a freaked out horse, your eye will change and your feelings will change. Because actually the biomechanics of the exuberant, playful horse is going to be, again, in quotes, better than the freaked out horse. The freaked out horse might be super athletic, but there's going to be tension and tightness. And so we have to ask ourselves, like, what exactly are we looking for? So the idea of pretty is as pretty does is sort of a good thing to remember. To me, calmness, harmony, and understanding is more beautiful than a tense horse, no matter how extravagant the movement. And I think the hallmark of good biomechanics ought to be that it is a positive, functional, and harmonious dynamic. Now, if you're less experienced, then you need to really become confident in the process and understand the full value of creating an excellent foundation so that you're not tempted to emulate the people who are skipping that step. So again, experienced riders need to exercise a lot of self-control and avoid over-manipulating the body in order to gain control. You're going to know when you're doing it. So anybody listening out there who's experienced, like, you know when, riding your horse forward to the aids starts turning into water skiing, or you can't let go, or you can't soften. If every time you give your reins, your horse speeds up or goes off track. So the key is to really recognize it, to know that you don't want to do that. Even if you're getting good quote unquote results, even if you're getting high marks, you know if you're using your aids for control rather than just connection. So recognize it and then choose to address the underlying problems. Now, this was the hardest part for me to do when I started doing dressage differently, when I started doing horses differently. Coming from my background as a dressage trainer, it felt so much easier just to use the techniques that were effective in holding body parts where I wanted them. Right? I am very capable of riding a horse who has terrible biomechanics and kind of fixing it up. And I know how to do it, and I can do it nicely. But that feeling that when you let go, they fall right back apart again is what I'm talking about, right? Or that's at its best, right? And at its worst, there's resistance and there's manipulation, and then there's feelings that you can't get it done with just your aids. So now you need extra aids and extra straps and things to put on them. So you really want to understand when you feel like you're having to hold things together, and let that be a red flag, right? And ultimately, it's about taking the time to address things like happiness, harmony, and communication, because that is the fastest and most reliable way to find true healthy movement. So if you have self-control and you educate yourself to know what you're aiming for, then you're set up for the most success, right? So even if you don't have a lot of experience at the upper levels, if you have self-control as a human and you're committed to educating yourself to know what the end product is that you're looking for, now you're set up. Because during the times that you're focusing on the foundational work, you'll be able to make more refined choices. And you're going to notice and appreciate the significance of even small changes in positive directions. Now, in order to know what you're aiming for, you don't have to go get a science degree in biomechanics. So I often help people who are brand new to this process. And I do this even if you're highly experienced. I do it by simply asking you to think about the adjectives that you want to feel from your horse. So you can do this right here. Like, take a moment to list or say out loud some adjectives you want to feel. And as you play with your horse to develop even the basics, the mental and emotional connection, you can notice whenever your horse becomes a little more fill in the blank with your adjective. So if I'm observing my horse and maybe I know enough to know that I'd like my horse to be more rhythmic. Maybe you have a horse who, like, the tempo changes a lot and they kind of, they're a little erratic in their movement. And you're thinking, gosh, I see these other horses who are more cadenced and more rhythmic. I think I'd like my horse to be a little more of that. But maybe you're not even riding it yet. Maybe you're really just doing the basics. It's a young horse. Well, you can be playing online. You could be building up your communication about walk-trot transitions, that they just understands it. Or maybe you're working on your communication to change directions. Whatever it might be, you might not be thinking you're improving biomechanics, but you might notice during this exercise where you're just practicing him reading your body language for going from the walk to the trot to the walk again, you might notice half a circle or 5 strides where you're like, whoa, he was more rhythmic on that half a circle. And so now you can see, wow, just by increasing the communication, or just by whatever it was in the foundation, just by giving him more turnout, he's more rhythmic, interesting. Just by me dealing with some boundary issues on the ground, so we have more self-carriage and then I can trust him more. Wow, just by letting the line go looser, that circle was more rhythmic. And this is where it begins. And of course, there's specific key foundational conversations that you want to be working on, but really just as a way to start, just pay attention to in everything. I think sometimes you'll be really surprised, and it'll be interesting to notice when things change. And so when you notice these, even by accident in your training, you can highlight them and reward them. And you can also review in your mind, like, what did you just do to cause that good result? So there you are playing with your walk-trot transitions with your horse. You're just focusing on communication. Then, oh my goodness, he just did half a trot circle that looked amazing. Like, that might be a really good time to be attuned to him and go, whoa, I saw that. Wow, you went more rhythmically just then. And maybe rest on that. Highlight it. Make that picture in your mind. Your horse knows what he did, and he felt it. And I imagine that moving rhythmically feels better than not moving rhythmically. Often rhythm is tied to balance. So horses get more rhythmic when they get more balance. So some reason you got this, like, what's the opposite of collateral damage? You got this this bonus benefit that just thinking about communication, you got more rhythmic, and now you have that tucked away in your mind. He felt it. He knows you felt it. You saw it. You marked it. He's like, whoa, that was a hard mental exercise, but boy, do I feel good afterwards. And now you just learned something about your horse that you can maybe try again on another day when he's a little less rhythmic. You can go, oh yeah, let me just do some transitions. And that can make perfect sense. And that way, you'll start to be tuned in to how to help your horse's biomechanics. So this is what I mean by a lot of people underestimate how soon you can start focusing on biomechanics. And by focusing on biomechanics, it doesn't mean you just go straight to manipulating their body. And that's what so many people have trouble with, and why the sweet spot course is so important and so transformative. Now, when you follow the Happy Athlete Training Scale and appropriately prioritize biomechanics, you're going to approach all training differently. And you'll continue to work with your horse and perform exercises for your horse rather than doing dressage to your horse. The dressage work can become part of your partnership rather than an assault on it. And this is why this is such a crucial bridge between foundation and sport-specific training, where, in sport-specific training, if you're going up levels, like, just by nature, the mental, emotional, and physical challenges are going to increase. And so this whole bridge, this bringing the partnership forward with you through the more physical endeavors, this is the whole specialty of what we do in Dressage Naturally, and specifically in the sweet spot of Healthy Biomechanics program. So I wanted to give some examples here. Just a few horses came to mind that I thought might be interesting, to talk about in this context. So one example is about when priority number 2 is ignored. So priority number 2 is harmony. And I may have told this example on another podcast because it's just such a blatant example of this. So a young horse trailers in for a lesson with a dressage professional. This horse is normally calm and forward, but at this new facility, he's afraid to go in the covered arena. So it's time for his lesson, and eventually 2 people try to expedite the whole situation by getting on either side and leading him in. The horse is clearly still tense and more tense now, and he's going into freeze mode. Because of this, he doesn't go forward. And pretty soon the expected instructions of more leg are useless. And then the instructor is now walking behind him with a long whip. Now, he didn't touch the horse with the whip, but the horse for sure feels the pressure, and he does end up moving his legs faster, but he's still quite blocked in his body and mind and tense. And now he's afraid of the arena and the instructor instead of just the arena, and he's likely losing trust in his rider also. So his movement's tense and rigid, he's getting worse emotionally, and it becomes a horrible experience with dressage as they're now fighting about things that are normally easy for him. All right, so what could have been done? So by using the Happy Athlete Training Scale, it could have been easily determined that this is a harmony or a trust issue. Trust is a harmony issue, right? So since that's a higher priority than biomechanics, 2 options could have been successful and made this a really positive experience and an educational experience. So one option would be move the lesson to the outdoor arena that was right next to the covered arena so that they could actually do a dressage lesson on an unafraid horse. So you eliminate the reason for the tension. Just go, okay, I got it. I got to get my horse used to covered arenas. But for today, let's just go outside so I can actually have a dressage lesson with a dressage expert. The other option would be to continue the lesson inside the covered arena, but now the focus would be on the horse feeling calm and confident in that space, not doing dressage to the horse, right? And so that's what's sort of fun about what I do is I've got those options, to be able to just have that perspective. A dressage instructor is focused on being a dressage instructor. It's not his job to deal with foundation, except as a horseman, I think we all have this responsibility to understand these priorities so we can say, this is not going to be conducive. I could give you a dressage lesson, but it's going to make things worse. So that's the kind of perspective where you just whip out the Happy Athlete Training Scale, look at it and go, I don't think we should be doing this. All right. So another example. Here's an example of ignoring priorities 1, 2, 3, and 4. So a 7-year-old warm blood with chronic mysterious lameness who is in professional dressage training, yet balky and braced, and the owner's afraid of him. Because he was a horse in training and at quite expensive training, the trainers felt compelled to keep riding him, even though he was clearly uncomfortable. So there was a cycle of brace and mistrust created by strong aids asking the horse to do things that ended up causing him pain. His, I think, rightful defensiveness caused more strong aids to be applied, and he became increasingly balky and resistant, which caused fear in his owner, which caused the trainers to, quote unquote, correct him more. Now, the only training goal in that situation was to get him to do dressage because he was a dressage horse and the trainer bought him to learn dressage. Oh yeah, and P.S., he was kept in a stall with limited turnout and no socialization or ability to forage. So, what worked? What ended up working? What was the solution for this? So, this horse was given to me, and I addressed his lifestyle to meet his basic needs as a horse. I also increased our harmony by spending that first block of time, especially proving to him, I mean, I do this always, but especially then, proving to him I would not ask him to do things that hurt. And if he did give me his effort, instead of being braced and defensive, I promised I would not take more. And meanwhile, we also worked to improve the quality of our communication about things that were not physically challenging for him. And so I'm working on a lot of things at once, but in little bits. So I kind of feel like the happiness, harmony, communication, that's like one block, like that's foundational. And you can address different aspects of different ones, but you do it mindfully that you're, like I'm working on communication in a way that increases our harmony and increases happiness. I'm playing with harmony in a way that he will be happier. Like I'm always doing it to improve the higher priority, lower on the scale, higher priority. Okay, so working on quality communication, like, hey, I need an answer, and here's what I'm saying, but I would do that in circumstances that were not physically challenging for him because he had the physical pain issue. And then once he was open to the communication and all of that was good enough, then I started using the sweet spot protocol to find the place of movement in his body where he showed me he could move more comfortably and without pain. And at first that moment didn't look quote unquote correct, but it was the place where he told me he could move without pain. And now this created a positive cycle where everything improved everything, and everything improved trust. And yeah, we're on a upward spiral. And he went on to be a happy athlete for many years. Okay, last example, and this I think you'll find interesting, I hope. So this example is about ignoring priorities 4 and 5. So this is an 11-year-old Andalusian mare that grew up natural horsemanship. And she often became really impulsive and emotional. And when she was emotional, her back got really tight and her gaits became really stilted and tight. And also she could be spooky. And when this happened in the past, it was really treated as an emotional issue. So that's the expertise of natural horsemanship. So it was treated as an emotional issue. And she was emotional. But so she was often put through exercises that involved encouraging her to keep moving or allowed her to keep moving and then she would be moved through some sort of puzzle until she found a way to change her emotional state. Now that's a typical type of exercise that you can do with an emotional horse. You kind of you don't get too specific, but you kind of set up something where they're free to move, but there's some sort of boundary or puzzle there that's set up in a way that causes them to think differently. And when they become a little more calm, everything gets easier, and it's very sort of self-correcting, but it's an emotional exercise. So it takes time. You allow them to move for as much as they want, but you set up some restriction that causes them to start to change their mind and think differently. All right, so that's fair enough. But in her case, it had just become a chronic problem and it was not improving, right? So it was a good idea, but the bottom line was it wasn't improving. All right, so what worked? What was the solution? By consulting the Happy Athlete Training Scale, I was actually able to determine there really were no red flags regarding those first 3 priorities. She had a great lifestyle. There's a lot of harmony between her and me. There were no red flags in our communication in general. I mean, she was really connected at liberty, and I could ride her bridleless. And so by paying really close attention, I realized that she would always become impulsive and emotional on the right lead canter. But then what was initially didn't make that so obvious is once she did the right lead canter, then her emotions would often stay high even after the canter, and especially if it had been maintained for a while. So when I realized this connection of the right lead is what set it off, then it made sense. It's like, well, if the right lead is causing the problem and then you put her through an exercise where she maintains it, and that's just going to make it worse. So by going through and just double checking, let me check the lifestyle. Seems good. Let me check the harmony. It's like 99.9% of the time, it was all good. Communication, yes, there's a lot of understanding there. It was just getting emotional in the specific circumstance. And because it became chronic, now it was clouded because once she would go off, then she became generally tense and generally impulsive. So by checking things out, I was able to determine that it was actually a biomechanical consideration that was causing the emotional. So I used the sweet spot protocol, because now we're in the biomechanics department. So I used the sweet spot protocol and I improved her walk, her trot, and her left lead canter. I went deeper into that. And I avoided the right lead where she would get emotional. Like, let me make everything that I can do even better. And then I got really specific in applying gymnastic exercises to strengthen her weak side, stretch the tight side, and in general create better alignment. And then I would go back and touch on the right lead. And as her right lead canter improved, the instances of tension and being emotional decreased. And so now again, we got into this positive dynamic where her improved biomechanics caused an improvement in her general emotional state and our connection. So the good things got even better. All right, and again, what gave me permission to address this at the level of priorities 4 and 5 were the assessment of good enough in priorities 1, 2, and 3, as well as noticing the correlation and I guess the causation of the right lead canter and tension. And what's cool to note here is that even though we started with no red flags and sort of good enough in those foundational pieces, those qualities ended up improving even more once we got to the root of the problem. So don't be afraid to go from good to better. So I guess bottom line is, it's to answer the original question of this episode, it's never too early to think about biomechanics. So it's never too early to start thinking about how your horse moves, as long as you're committed to improving it from the inside out. And you're committed to using necessary self-control when it comes to physical manipulation. Posture is a dynamic, not a shape, and precision arrives out of the possibilities that playfulness creates, and curiosity can be more powerful than knowledge. By educating yourself and understanding how you want your horse to move, you can target those qualities during your foundational training. So there are consequences to over-manipulating your horse's body, and there are consequences to not addressing your horse's body at all. Every horse is different, and it's so important to have an understanding of the mental, emotional, and physical dynamic happening between you and your horse. So in the Dressage Naturally program in general, and the Sweet Spot protocol in particular, we teach the principles and priorities that are going to guide you from the beginning to the advanced work. We focus on doing it for the horse and not to the horse. And the exercises are created to work in partnership with the horse. So the horses are able to show us what feels better for them. And it's done in a way where their willing participation in the process is paramount. So in the Sweet Spot program, we actually start with the foundational pieces, and then we bring students through the process of improving movement, improving their rider position and connection with the reins, and we go on to the very basics of gymnastic development. It's a highly supported program. Again, it opens for registration every March and September. If you have any questions, you can always email us. You can ask to book a free private consult, or at the very least, just make sure you're on our mailing list so we can let you know when registration opens. All right. I hope that helps.